of ways is quite a lot of not too dissimilar to some of my own experiences sort of growing up and becoming a Christian as well. One thing it just made me think of listening to you is, when you were talking about being at school and feeling that, in quite a middle class environment and feeling kind of excluded from that as sort of work from a sort of working class family, etc. Sort of, well, poor family, I found. Listening to you tell your story, it's very difficult to have, I don't know if you have similar experiences, but trying to talk about your background and upbringing to people from a Christian middle class background is very uncomfortable. And they don't, have you had similar sort of experiences? Because they just don't get it. Like there's a certain, you have certain experiences growing up and they don't have anything that's at all related to those experiences you have. And I very quickly just, stop telling people about it because it's people, they don't know what to do. They've never had those kinds of experiences and they don't know. It's just so foreign to their kind of Christian experience.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think for me there's a kind of a continuum that I will move along depending on what signals I get from someone. So sometimes you're talking to someone and you think, do you know what? I'm not even going to try explaining some of the cultural background right now because it's too much work for where this person's at. And so you kind of then at that end of the continuum. Other times I'm chatting to someone and the kind of questions they ask along the way and their body language suggests that they're thinking, I want to understand you a bit better and I acknowledge there's differences, help me understand you better. And then I find myself moving more this way. And then I've got other friends who, even though culturally they're from such a different background, we've had a number of shared life experiences. So like growing up fatherless, there's lots of people from middle class backgrounds who have grown up fatherless. And so you can relate to them on that level. And even if they don't understand the poverty thing, they understand the fatherless thing. So I guess in a sense, sometimes when I'm talking to people, I'm looking for kind of like subconsciously, are there points of contact where I can share my story with someone comfortably and not get preached at. So for example, I know someone who shared their story with someone and the person interrupted them and said, oh, no, it couldn't have been like that. And same way, I have seen a difference with sometimes some of my posh friends will invite me around their place. I've got to know them a bit and they invite me for dinner and it'll be the first time I'm meeting their wife and they'll ask me something about my story and I'll share it. And sometimes their wife, who doesn't know me, will interrupt me and say, oh no, I'm sure you misunderstood that situation. I'm sure when that teacher did that to you, it was really because da 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 da. And it does kind of, on this continuum, it makes you go back at this end because you're like, well, if I'm going to share vulnerable stuff from my life and if at first face value, whatever the phrase is, you straight away discount my interpretation and straight away start defending someone who has oppressed me in some way, then I'm like, I think I'm going to stay at this end of the continuum just because it's not worth trying to explain. It's exhausting as well, isn't it? If you're always having to explain your background to people.
Yeah. There's essentially talking about the sort of class stuff. Very rarely get to chat to people about, especially people from a working class background as well, because there is something about at least English Christianity that has the effect of turning people middle class. It has like this middle class effect where I don't know, similar to experiences that when I grew up, I had sort of people around me were not married. They didn't stay married. Not many people had a dad, people, and suddenly you become a Christian, and you're surrounded by people who tend to be, at least in a lot of churches I went to, when I first became a Christian, I ended up in a sort of Pentecostal church, African Pentecostal church. And it was very much about, having a job, working, wanting to be successful, going to university, getting married, staying married. And the the effect of that is, for all appearances, you look middle class. And so if you come out of a working class background into the English church, it does have this effect of you sort of then, I feel like you sort of lose your roots. It's very easy to lose your roots, because if you do go to university, your friends, you're much less likely to come into contact from working class background. And so your friends are middle class, their friends are middle class, church is full of the middle class. And I don't know whether you thought too much about that kind of effect that the church has on people.
I agree with you. I think it is a thing, and I think there's so many factors for it. So one factor is the fact that a lot of Christians use the term social lift, and there is a perception in the church in Britain that when a working class person becomes a Christian, that it is a good thing that they experience social lift. And that's not something that gets interrogated. It's just an assumption that people see because we grow up in the kind of system we grow up in Britain. People just assume, well, surely it's right that you have social lift, and surely this is what God would want of you. And people even assume, along with that if you start reading your Bible, that will automatically give you social lift, as if working class people don't ever read, and I think that needs to be interrogated, especially in light of what Paul says about class in Corinthians. But also, I think it's also about all the resources that we have, which makes, most of you guys are into apologetics. The majority of apologetics resources in this country are aimed at the middle classes, right? Mm-hmm. And for the last few years, it's been the new atheists that Christian publishing in this country has really, targeted. And even so a lot of the books you read, by reading them, you just breathe in middle class culture, and you hear the answers to middle class culture, but you don't hear the answers to the questions that working class culture is asking so much. And even in terms of where people are doing ministry, even terms like, we say student ministry, but what we really mean is university ministry. We don't mean FE college. So, there's loads of FE colleges around the UK. I used to work in FE, so I'm aware of how common FE, further education colleges, are. But every single time I hear a Christian say they're involved in student ministry, I just know that they don't mean FE college, apart from the one lady I met who works for an organization that does stuff in FE colleges. But so so not only have we started redefining terms along class lines, but it also means that if you grow up in a working class environment and go to your local FE college, statistically speaking, you're way less likely to hear the gospel than if you grow up in a middle class home and go to university. And obviously by that, I'm not wanting to in any way diminish all the hard work that people are doing in universities, not at all. But we've got an imbalance. And then from where you get less people come from an FE college into church life, it means that church life ends up being middle class, and there aren't people from the working classes represented there. And then the people like you and I, we go off to university, we've constantly got this pull of pulling us away from our roots and not using the vernacular that we used to use, not using as strong an accent that we used to use, and even, I would say, sometimes thinking in different categories to how we grew up thinking, to the point that sometimes we meet up with our old mates and the way that we talk about life sometimes means we've lost what J.H. Bavinck called missionary power, where our friends are like, what's happened to you? You've gone proper soft. You're really posh now and everything. And, and in terms of apologetics, it's like when people start trying to discuss the ontological problem with their friends at the bus stop or something, and it's like, what's going on here,
My wife says that I speak differently around different people. So I think when you're working class, especially when you go to university, you realise that you have to get very good at being sort of identifying how to present yourself in different contexts. And so she even says, like, if I play football, I sound different. So if I'm like when I was used to play football, like 11 aside on a Saturday, most people are not middle class. It's mostly working class sport. And so she said, I even sound different the way I'm shouting and speaking. She's like, why do you sound different? But then when I'm around like other people, so I'm at church or I'm at work, like the university or something, around different people, I speak differently. So it's quite funny how I think I don't, that's not necessarily a Christian thing, but I think, as you said, like working class people that sort of filter out into sort of more middle class culture, you have to get sort of wise about how to do that. And I've not managed to, I found it very difficult. Like you said, you go back and you're not having the same conversations, like it feels foreign, in a sense, like when I'm, in the changing room and stuff you're talking about, and they're talking about, I think, no one talks about that stuff, like when, at church or things like that. So it's really interesting that, I think, like you said, it's quite an astute sort of observation that you kind of lose your way a little bit, I think.